Welcome, and thank you for getting involved in the development of RTA's Strategic Mobility Plan. Your participation and input is very important to us. What is the Strategic Mobility Plan, you might ask? It will be RTA's roadmap for improving public transportation in the New Orleans region over the next 20 years. Why focus on mobility and not just transit? Mobility has two distinct but intertwined meanings. It is most commonly used in reference to physical movement, the ability to move from one place to another. But it has another important definition. Mobility is also the ability to move between different levels in society or employment levels. That means that this strategic mobility plan needs to do more than just ensure we are better able to deliver the services the RTA has traditionally been known for, including bus, streetcar, ferry, and paratransit. To provide the mobility this region needs in the current era, we need to look even further and consider how transit can partner with and be supported by parking management and bicycle programs and facilities, on-demand mobility services like Uber, Lyft, and Chariot, real-time information, and overall improvements for pedestrians and access for people of all abilities. The planning process will take about a year, wrapping up at the end of 2017. We started with the listening and learning phase from January through March, where we met with the public and stakeholders to better understand their priorities and ideas. In March and April, we gathered information on opportunities and constraints and analyzed a tremendous amount of data to find out more about demands for mobility in the region. The visioning phase of work is again consulting our riders and other stakeholders on what they want future mobility to do for them and what success looks like. In late summer and into fall, we will examine potential strategies for achieving this vision, and toward the end of the year, we will present a draft plan for public review prior to adoption by the RTA Board. Over the 3-month listening and learning period, we engaged over 2,000 residents of the region and dozens of stakeholder groups and partners. Over 900 people took the time to provide input into the plan either in person or online, answering 2 critical questions. Which aspects of public transportation do they value most? And what is their big idea for improving public transportation and mobility? Roughly equal proportions of frequent riders, occasional riders, and infrequent riders participated in the survey. Regardless of rider type, however, all riders or would-be riders most valued the same components: access to destinations and reliability. When asked about what they would do to improve mobility going forward, again, both riders and non-riders shared the same priorities. Improving existing services was the top priority, along with a strong emphasis on enhancing information, adding additional services, and improving access to transit. We also looked at a number of trends in how the transit system has been doing over the last several years. In recent years, RTA has steadily been increasing service. The total number of passengers using the system increased substantially from 2009 to 2014, but has leveled off in recent years. Both bus and streetcar ridership have grown, with a similar percentage of riders using both services since 2009. We looked at fare costs around comparable systems and regions across the country, including what the cost here would be if we had kept pace with inflation. And we compared that to what the current fare price is at RTA, and found RTAs to be among the lowest amongst its peers. We looked at trends in the use of technology, payment systems, regional coordination, and land use development and last-mile connections. And we looked at a whole host of different kinds of mobility options that are emerging all across the country and asked ourselves how these could be used to serve the people of our region to provide the physical mobility they need so they can achieve the economic mobility they want. Then we went about the task of determining what is the level of demand for mobility services across our region, and which could be best satisfied by traditional transit service, and where other mobility options may better meet people's travel needs. Transit demand is determined looking at 4 key factors: where there are concentrations of jobs and economic activity, where there are concentrations of people, where there are other major destinations such as stadiums, schools, shopping malls, or hospitals, and finally, looking at the patterns of where people are typically traveling to and from. We also looked at other factors such as how streets are laid out, auto ownership rates, household incomes, and where special needs populations are concentrated. Jobs in the region are predominantly concentrated around the Central Business District and along Veterans Boulevard. Uptown, Mid-City, Elmwood, and Old Jefferson also have significant concentrations. In the New Orleans region, many of these areas also include a number of low-wage jobs that often involve late evening, early morning, or other off-peak travel times. Population in the region is most densely concentrated in Orleans Parish and Jefferson Parish, particularly between the Mississippi and Lake Pontchartrain. Population is more scattered in St. Bernard Parish and St. Tammany Parish, though there are some areas of concentration in and around Chalmette, Mandeville, Covington, and Slidell. Low-income populations are important to note as these residents tend to be more dependent on public transportation. Concentrations of lower-income households are outlined in yellow and clustered in central New Orleans, central Metairie, New Orleans East, and Algiers, Tarrytown. Then we need to think about travel flow, the general direction of dominant demand. When we look at the regional travel demand model, we see strong patterns of travel, generally east and west, between Kenner, Metairie, Mid-City, and the Central Business District, circulating around Kenner, Elmwood, and Veterans Boulevard, and along the West Bank between Marrero and Algiers. We also see strong demand to travel across the lake from St. Tammany to Jefferson Parish, and between East New Orleans and major commercial areas. When combined and factoring in considerations of auto ownership, income, and disability status, we begin to see key corridors of high transit demand. These include Magazine Street and St. Charles Avenue, Canal Street, Veterans Boulevard, Elmwood to the CBD paralleling Earhart Expressway and Claiborne Avenue, and US 90 on the West Bank. These strong spines of demand could support transit frequencies greater than service every 10 minutes, while most other areas generally support 30-minute service in Central Orleans Parish and less elsewhere. The last part of our current analysis is to look at the transit we have today and the areas of transit demand. Overlaying the two, we see some areas are very well matched. St. Charles Avenue and Canal Street both demand high levels of transit service and generally receive it. However, the corridors connecting Central Orleans Parish to Elmwood and out to Metairie and Kenner are less well served. Because the mobility plan is a roadmap for future travel demand, we're also using projections to see how it can work as conditions change, including the number of people, where they live, types and locations of jobs, and the price of housing. So now that we have all this information, where do we go from here? Right now, we need to clearly define our vision for mobility and what we want to accomplish. After we do this, we will identify strategies to achieve that vision, including traditional transit services and new mobility options. And finally, we will put together a plan of action to implement these strategies, both immediately and in the long run. Please help by sharing your vision for our mobility future. Thank you.